Hi, I'm Bob Switzer, and this is the Epic Narrative. And we're back. The story continues. There you go. Well, I know. Last whatever. I don't know how long it's been, but the last time I was at the microphone, I mentioned in the story of David and Goliath that David took the head of Goliath to Jerusalem. And I really believe that that's because he got an insight from God, a word of knowledge, a revelation from heaven. God spoke to David in an amazing way. But, all that's true. I just said it in funny ways, but with a funny voice. But, yeah. And so I think he went there because I believe God told him, that's the city that I told Moses about, that there would be a city with my name on it. And that's the city. And what's interesting is that the city at the time wasn't even named Jerusalem. It was like Jebu. They were Canaanites that had survived the taking of the promised land by Joshua, and they lived in the city and they held it in such a way that we'll see later, like when David goes to free the city, like they laughed at him. It was kind of like the attitude of I'm thinking of the Lord of the Rings when they went to Minas Tirith. What was the name of that king? I know people are freaking out, right? It was King. Oh, it was the guy that was possessed with wormwood and oh golly. Anyways, they went to their stronghold, right? They went to their stronghold, impenetrable, never been penetrated for thousands of years, but clearly it was, and that's an awesome story, man. That's an epic. But the people in Jebu were known as Jebusites, and they had that kind of attitude. So when David went to take the city, they approached it that way. They were like, "Yeah, you're funny." Like we literally could defend our city with handicapped people. That's how confident we are that you're not coming in here. And if you want to know what happened, you'll have to listen to the rest of the podcast. We won't get there today. Sweet Jesus, no. We are taking our time. Glory. Just having a good time. I did listen back to one of my podcasts recently, and I realized that there's I've got to get better at being a podcaster, because I have way too many pauses, I think. And I'm sure it's because in a lot of ways I want to choose my words carefully, and in other ways I'm making facial expressions of which you don't know. So I was thinking, well, maybe I should start doing these maybe after the story of David. Maybe I'll do another one. I've already wanted to start moving into Genesis and Exodus, because I think there's so much misunderstanding about the wrath of God and God killing everyone and the genocide that occurs in the Promised Land, which I kind of just referenced. But it's God gets credit for all that. I don't think he deserves any. Oh no, Bob, you blasphemer! God, the Bible says. Hey, stay tuned. Stay tuned. I'll work my way around. I'll work my way through this. Just stay with me. Do not walk away. Just say, what if? What if some of what he says might work? Anyways, so stay with me. And if nothing else, just enjoy the story. You don't have to like my theology. It's just a story. It's a fun, amazing story that you can identify and work through so many issues when you understand the narrative, when you work through the narrative. And that's why I believe the Bible was inspired with all of these stories, because God was like, I could just make a list of stuff to do, not to do, blah, 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 blah. But that's not my point. My point is it's life, it's relationship, it's connection. And this is how we roll. So, sorry. So we're now in 1 Samuel 18. Oh, why did I start? Oh, because of the Jebusites. That's right. So I believe David went there with the head. And again, I love the visual in my mind. I know I don't necessarily always do a great job of describing, but that whole scene in my head of David walking down the road with the head of Goliath that's literally like split in two with a rock, and just that whole scene, and the Jebusites looking at him wondering what in the world is going on, and then he just tosses it at the city gate and walks away, because I don't think he went into the city for this reason. He knew in his heart, this is the city that I'm going to take for God. This is it. God's going to reside here. It's going to be pretty awesome, but it's not mine yet. And he walked away. Now, I don't know if he knew he was going to be the one who took it, but I do believe he understood that one day that city would belong to the nation and God would be honored there. All right, so 1 Samuel 18. So after David finished talking with Saul, I love that. Jonathan became one in spirit with David and loved him as himself. Okay. So that first phrase, after David finished talking to Saul. This is one of those opportunities that we get to use our imaginations again. This is so awesome. So David's talking to Saul. When did this occur? Well, it happened after he killed Goliath, after they pursued the Philistines, after David had walked to Jebu, or Jerusalem, and dropped the head off, after he returned from that city, went through the tent of Goliath, took his weapons and his tunic, and carried it all back to his personal tent, and probably got himself a little cleaned up from all of his travels, because he had been all over the place, in the desert, on the hills, in the forest, traveling along the roadside. So there was a lot of dust from the carts and the animals and the other people that were there. And I'm sure many who would look at him weird and be like, what's this? And I'm sure some curious ones and maybe some kids who are like, hey, where'd that head come from? That sort of thing. So he's had this long day. And I think he went to talk to Saul probably the next day. I don't see this happening in just a few hours. This was because of the phrasing in the previous chapter where it says, and they pursued the Philistines all day. I think David was a part of that all day thing. And then he slept in the tent, and then he was presented to Saul, and Saul basically was like, tell me everything. Review for me now that I know who you are, now that I know the family you come from, I want to know what brought you here. I want to know the whole story. So I think David started way back, because this is why. I think David is an artist. He's a musician. He's a storyteller. He's a songwriter. Yes, he is a warrior. He is passionate. He is good looking. He is young. I think he's a talker. And I guess because I'm also a storyteller, I just don't picture David telling this in a short soundbite. Like, well, I knew God was on my side. I felt like I was called into this time, for such a time as this. And God was with me, and I figured if I die, I die. But if I don't, then we all win. And boom, I'm pretty good with a sling. I practiced a lot as a shepherd, and boom, yeah, killed the guy. And then, I cut off his head because that was cool. I don't think it went like that because of what happened. When he was done talking, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. There was an interaction. There was a weaving of lives together here. The heart of David was seen, and I believe he started with, yes, I am a son of Jesse, but that wasn't always agreed upon. You see, how do I say this? So my dad had 7 sons, and actually 3 of them are here. We're here with the army. I think they already headed home with all their plunder, but because Saul was probably like, "Well, go get them. We'll honor them too." And he's kind of like, "Yeah, we don't get along great." You see, this whole thing with my okay. So this is a long story, but this is how it goes. And he told them, my dad rejected me. My dad treated me and raised me as a servant in the house, not necessarily a slave, although I know that some would make those two words equal. Servants were closer to employees. Slaves were not. Slaves, but they could be. It's complicated, right? Because it's relational, and it was culturally normal. It wasn't just one race of people that would be turned into slaves. You could make a decision to be a servant for a particular household because it meant you got to sleep in a nice house, and you were taken care of. To be a servant in certain homes and certain family groupings was a good thing. Slaves in Israel, you were only you were a slave, but only for 6 years. The 7th year was always a year of jubilee. You were freed. So again, it wasn't it was not slavery in that like what America did, Europeans did to Africans. So definitions are important. I just wanted to throw that out. So he's like, my dad treated me like a servant. I was raised in the servant quarters. I ate and drank, slept with the servants. I was trained as a shepherd. As a young boy, that's where my training was. So I was going to be a shepherd my whole life, and my father's family, for my father's family. He never claimed me until Samuel came along. Oh, Samuel. And David's probably thinking, oh, maybe not the best time to tell this guy that I was anointed the next king of Israel, but it was a significant day in David's life. And I'm sure he told him about his mom. His mom, reminded him, you are his son. You are the son of Jesse. I know. I bore you. He put you in me. I know you're his. He doesn't like it because we basically tricked him on the wedding night, but you are his. And so David knew it, and it didn't necessarily make things easier because it actually probably at times made it worse. Like he probably at times wished he never knew that he was actually Jesse's son. And I thought about the mom, the other day, and I thought I could totally see the mom as she became aware of David's strengths and his friendliness and his good looks and his musical abilities. Like she would, as a woman, she would have, and especially the matron of the household, she would have been aware of all the servants. Like she would have been in their quarters. She would have been in their, for lack of a better term, their dining tent, where they ate, and made sure that they were cared for. That would have been under her jurisdiction. So her ability to stay interactive with her son was there, although she couldn't show favoritism and cause that kind of trouble. There were many times, I'm sure, where she made choices that I'm sure were hurtful to David because she chose to go to be with Jesse and her other sons. It had to be a very complicated, weird dynamic of a family to live in for David. And so all of those layers are getting expressed to Saul. But I was thinking about the mom, and I could totally see her listening at night when David is out with, on duty, so to speak, out with the other shepherds, spending the night in the fields, which they would do many, many times. But if you've ever been camping, and I trust many of you have, you know that when people talk in the next campsite over, it's incredibly loud. It's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, there's times, I don't camp a lot, but there was a season where we had a camper, and we take our 4 kids and we'd go out into the camping world, and it was fun. It was fun for the season. But there were times where it seemed like they were literally in our campsite making noise, and they were like, 3 roads over and 7 campsites down. You're like, my gosh, I swear they're right outside my fire, like around my fire pit having a party. And I have no doubt I did that to other people, not because I wanted to. I wasn't trying to be loud, but I'm an early riser. So I'd be up at 4:30, 5 o'clock. I'd start the fire and I'd be, inadvertently kind of banging around because that's what you have to do when you start a fire. And I have no doubt that there were people that were trying to sleep that had been up, past midnight around their fires. And they're like, why is that man up? What is going on? Tell him to stop chopping wood. But, I felt the same way about them 3 hours earlier. So all that to say what, Bob? My goodness, you cannot make this a simple illustration, can you? Oh, that's right. So I just think Mom heard him playing. I totally could see her, late at night hearing a small little dance party going on out in the wilderness with David strumming a lyre and other somebody's playing percussions. Even if they can't, there's always somebody who likes to thump on things. So thumping on a log or banging rocks together. Somebody making a shaker out of a clay pot and some stones. Like, that was going on. Not every night, but periodically. And I just picture her with a big smile on her face, and she laid there, or she would walk out into the hill a little bit so she could hear him a little more. And she would think, God, please make a way. Make a way for that boy. He does not deserve what he's getting. He doesn't deserve this kind of rejection. I just do. I just think she was there, even though circumstantially, even though there were times where David even felt rejection from his mother because she would not treat him special, or she would tell him what to do and not give a wink or a smile. And there were times where I'm sure his father would see her talking to him and would call her, and she would turn and walk away right away, as though he was just a servant. And that had to hurt. So David's talking with Saul. He describes the rejection, the hurt that his father caused. And I think Saul is really tracking with this guy because he's had a very difficult childhood, where a father who was seemed very difficult to please, a father that he had often disappointed, and was left without the dreams that he might wanted to have pursued. He ended up doing what he was told and being who he was expected to be, and that's exactly the position he's in now. And David's life probably began to sound like such a place of freedom, this breath of fresh air, this boy who had had terrible circumstances, and yet pursued life and pursued hope and pursued love and music and art and warfare. And I mean, he had everything going for him. And I think Saul began to fall in love with this guy, because when you're without an identity and you see somebody who you kind of start to track with, you start to think, I want to be like this person. They are who I am. Like, sometimes you look at them and you think, no, that's me. I'm just like you. I think Saul might have had some of those moments in listening to David. I've had people tell that to me sometimes, and I kind of chuckle, because I think in my head, every time someone said that to me, I thought, there's no way you're like me. Like, there's just no way. But I appreciate the fact that in their own way, they were trying to say, and usually it has to do with telling stories. They'd be like, yeah, I tell stories. I'm just like you. I'm funny and I tell stories. And I think, no, okay. Like, I kind of doubt it. Like, it's an art. Like, everybody does this differently. We're not alike, but that's okay. There was something about, what I was saying that made them feel really connected to an identity that they have, or to a processing that they have. And I think Saul felt that way about David. I think he looked at David and thought, I could be this guy. I could pursue the type of freedom, hope, and love relationship. I could be like this guy. This is amazing. He's an amazing man. And then I'm sure David wove in all that he knew about his connections to heaven and these wonderfully intense mystical experiences that he had with God, and just the music that would come out of him and the lyrics that would come out of him, and all that way he finally gets to the place. He gets to the place, where he says, and so my dad sent me to bring some food for the brothers. So I brought the cheese and the wheat and I forget something else he brought. And then I heard the rush of men going down into the field, and I went with them, and then I heard what Goliath was saying, and I started talking to the men, like, what is going on? Why are we taking this? And they told me what would happen if someone took on Goliath. And I thought, I can do that. Like, not that I can do that, but like, who wouldn't do that? Who wouldn't want to take on somebody who's defying the living God? And that's why I think he told them all about his connection to heaven. I think he told them about the connection to heaven because that's what motivated him to take on Goliath. It was not about ego. It was not about the rewards. It was not about pride. I guess that would be ego. You just repeated yourself. That's okay. It was not about it was all about his passion for heaven. Like, I think if Goliath had only attacked the men's character, like if he called them all wimps, if he called them all, worms and maggots and poop, like whatever. Like if he just made fun of them and their families and their wives and their kids and I don't know if David would have like had the kind of response he did. But the fact that Goliath went after God, and David had such an intense relationship with God, like he not only experienced being loved by God, but he was living in a place where he knew he was loved, where he knew he was accepted. And to have that attacked when that was probably the only place that David felt loved was in the presence of God and his lifestyle of staying connected to the presence of God, to have that attacked, like that is not going to happen. And that's exactly why he went after Goliath. He did not pursue it for any other reason. And so I believe that in talking to Saul, all of that gets woven in because that was his motive. And Saul seeing a boy that he could trust, a young man that was passionate, a young man that could be brought into the palace, that wasn't, quote, family, that wasn't politics, that wasn't his dad's friends who needed a favor, that wasn't another nation trying to look for a way to influence Saul. This was a young man who was filled with creativity, filled with hope. This was like a light in the darkness. Saul was like, you are awesome. And Jonathan listens to all that, and he becomes one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. And I know that this phrasing gets twisted. I believe it gets twisted into a homosexual relationship for David and Jonathan, because people they like to do that. It's an intense phrasing in Hebrew. There's no way around it. It is very intense. It does not mean homosexual, but it is intense. It is intimate. It is no small matter. He fell in love with what David carried. He was like this boy, this friend, this person, this guy. I absolutely love this guy. Everything about him I track with. Because you got to remember, right? What did Jonathan do? Jonathan took on the Philistines in a David Goliath type of scene, right? he takes on 100,000 people. That's a lot. That's a pretty big giant. He takes them on and he wins and inspires the army, and they pursue the Philistines and pillage, everything they left behind. So Jonathan tracked with the heart of David, his heart for God, his passion for God, right? Why did Jonathan go after those Philistines? Because he said, if God is for us, who can be against us? Of course we'll win. Why wouldn't we win? Yeah. So to hear David tell this whole long story about why he was so passionate about going after the Philistine, Jonathan felt that as well. He felt it deeply, and probably in some ways was thinking, wow, that's even more than me, because I heard this guy make fun of God for 40 days. And so he not only sees himself in David, he sees somebody he can look up to in David, somebody who's closer and more passionate about God than even he is. It was inspirational. And Jonathan's like, wow, I love this guy. And from that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. So that day, I don't know how long it took. And again, this is why I think it did not take place on the same day as the death of Goliath and the pursuit of the Philistines and the trip to Jerusalem and all of that. I think it took place on its own day. And it would not have been something that would have happened like, oh, David's done telling a story. Oh, okay, well, now you're never going home again. There would have been other members of the royalty there. I'm sure Abner was there. Right, the general of the armies. I have no doubt that he wanted to hear David's story and was a part of that. Saul's father might have been there as well, and maybe, I mean, Jonathan was there. His other two brothers might have been around. The other princes, so to speak, were probably all part of the royal family. They would have been there. Like, there was more than just three guys in the room when this whole story took place. And I have no doubt that David's ability to tell the story was very enrapturing and drew everybody in, and they all tracked with him. Even if they had great relationships with their families, there was something about the way that David told the story that made people go, oh my God, like I could feel that. I could feel the anger. I could feel the rejection. I could feel the frustration. I could feel the darkness. And yet I could also feel the hope and the love and the adoration toward God and from God. And oh man, this was such a great story. And it was just David's life. And they all fell in love with him. So Saul kept David with him. And I'm sure that what I mean by saying I don't think this happened flippantly, I think that he was like, David, I want you to be a part of my cabinet. Like I don't want you going back and forth home, because part of David's story would have been, hey, so like a year ago, I got an invitation to the palace to play songs. And Saul's like, oh, that's where I've heard your voice before. You're the lyre player. Yeah, I'm the lyre player. Oh my gosh, you are so good. And I'm sure that there were little side stories that would go on about how Saul was like, your music means so much to me. You have no idea what that does. And David was like, oh, thanks. You have how much that means to me. I love worshiping God. I love singing songs to him. And I taught myself to play the lyre because I had nothing else to do all night long out on the fields, and there was some shepherds that knew how to play, and like there was all these little side stories that would have taken place once Saul figured out that they were kind of sort of in the same, they were acquaintances before, not that Saul didn't really even know David's he didn't know whose son he was, and that's why he had to ask Abner after Goliath was killed. He was like, where's that kid from? What's that family that's now tax exempt? That's what he needed to know. We need to make sure that this family, this boy gets rewarded like I promised, because he just killed the giant. So all of that's going on, and he's like, David, I don't want you to leave. I want you to work here for me. And then I think he probably had a conversation with Abner, because Abner's thinking it would be great morale booster for the army if this guy got if we gave him a position within the troops, because he's now like a giant killer. Like, this is a big freaking deal. And it means a lot. And the legend is going to go all over the nation, and probably had already started to spread. Not just the nation of Israel, but it spread through the nation of Philistines as well, all up and down the seacoast and in the trade markets. The stories of David and Goliath kept going and going and going, and would have for years. And so I'm guessing Abner's thinking this would be great. Let's put him in the military. Saul's good with that. It puts him in he gives him a position. And Jonathan makes a covenant with David. Now what does that mean? It means that because it says because he loved him as himself, he's calling David a member of the family. Now this is huge for David, because Saul at this time takes on the role of a father who loves him, a father who appreciates the passions that David has, appreciates his music, appreciates his lyrics, appreciates his storytelling, appreciates his warrior attitude, appreciates his courage, appreciates his physical strength, appreciates his good looks. Like, everything about David at this point is being appreciated by a father figure and the king. So David is connecting maybe for the first time to an adult male figure, and it feels amazing. And then in the same room is a peer, somebody who is about the same age, somebody who is literally like a brother, who loves David. And he loves him as himself. He loves him as part of the family. He loves him in an intense, intimate way that says, I'm never going to be disloyal to you. I'm never going to leave you. I will always be with you. These are words and attitudes that David should have been hearing from 7 other guys in the nation, his 7 brothers, and he never heard it from any of them. So Jonathan and Saul take on roles in David's life that are intense places of connection, intense places of relationship that David had been longing for a long, long time. And in that, Jonathan makes a covenant with David. And covenants are things that are designed to go for lifetimes. They're designed to be between nations or families that says everything I have is yours. If you lose everything, then I take care of you. Like, everything of mine is yours. So if I have $1 million and you have $1 million and we have a covenant, and then you lose $1 million, you don't have to worry, because my million is yours. And if you lose my million, that's fine, because we're in covenant. And covenants support one another and love one another and are loyal to one another above all circumstances and resources. It's a relational connection. That's why God made marriage a covenant event, not a contractual event, and not an event of convenience. A covenant event says this is relational. Circumstances and resources are not what we're after. Although, granted, when you're in relationship, resources and circumstances are going to probably work together with you. But all that to say, it was intense. David's connection to Jonathan was intense. Everything there in that room for that day it turned David's life around into the positive. He was no longer going to go home. What did that mean? You are no longer going to live in a place of rejection. You're no longer going to live in a place where resources are available to you at the discretion of people who reject you. You are going to live in a palace. You are going to have authority. You're not going to go home where you're just a servant and what you say doesn't matter if you're even allowed to say anything. You're going to be in a place where your voice matters, where what you say, people are going to listen to. When you give a command, it will be obeyed because you are going to have a role in the palace. You're going to be part of the government of the nation. This is a huge, big, freaking day for David. I bet you he was in tears most of the day, just weeping over how much reversal is going on in his life. How much joy he was having. How many times did he just praise God? He just had nothing else to say except hallelujah. He had nowhere else to go with all the emotion that was going on in him. It had to be wicked intense. And Jonathan took off his robe that he was wearing, and he gave it to David along with his tunic, and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. So what does the robe and staff mean? It means you are family, and you have influence. The tunic, the robe, the what else did I want? Oh, the robe, the tunic, the sword, the bow, his belt, everything about it basically said David is equal to a prince in Jerusalem, or not in Jerusalem, in Israel. David is equal to me. David and I are brothers. Saul was in agreement with this, right? This would not have been done in a vacuum. Saul was saying, David is a son to me. This had to be, this whole event had to be pretty crazy when word got back to Jesse. Honestly, I mean, this had to be insane. Jesse, the other three sons, right, the three older ones, they come back from war with a bunch of plunder from the Philistines. Word had probably already gotten back to the village through runners and through others that were just faster than these guys that were probably in their 30s or 40s. Word gets back to Jesse that the battle's been won, that Goliath was killed, and he might have even heard that there was a servant boy who killed Goliath with a sling. And Jesse's probably, at the very least, doing a little bit of the math and the timeline and thinking, wait a minute. That can't be David. It can't be. I mean, I know he knows how to do the sling. He's pretty good at it from what I hear. But, and then the three sons arrive. And he's like, please come sit with me. Talk to me immediately. I need to know what's going on. And they were like, oh, Dad, you're not going to believe what happened. Why did you send David? I think they're still pissed. I do. I think they're still pissed. They were pissed at David when all David was doing was motivating the troops and telling people he'd go after Goliath. That pissed them off, right? Now they get home. I think they're still pissed. Why? Because when you're a victim, it doesn't matter what happens. You're still a victim. And I think they looked at their dad and they were like, you did this to us. You sent David with cheese and wheat, and you could have sent anybody. Why did you send David? And he's like, tell me what happened. Well, he shows up and rather than watching those sheep that he should have been watching, he that's where you should have left him, in the fields, because that's where he deserves to be. And now he goes out in the field like with a sling, gets one lucky shot. One lucky shot. There's no way that he could do that. Given another 1,000 chances, David would never hit the head of that Goliath. He would have been crushed under the 15-pound spearhead. But no, he hits Goliath in the head. He runs up and cuts off his head, and then we win. So we pursued, we got all this great plunder, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure that story took for a while. And then we loaded up the carts and we came here. And now David is part of the government. David. The oldest son is probably thinking, of all people that are part of the government, it should be me. David got anointed the next king of Israel. Fine, whatever. No one believes him anyways. But now Saul's made him part of the government. He was in the throne tent, the royal tent. There you go. He was in the royal tent all day telling stories. We left. There was no way we were staying. We didn't need to hear those kind of lies. No, no way. Now Saul thinks he's all like this brave, courageous hero, and now he's going to put him in the government. Great. What do you think David's going to do now? He's coming for us, Dad. He's coming for us. You know he is. Now maybe the royal messenger showed up before them and said, hey, by the way, because your son David beat Goliath, you're now tax-free. Maybe he knows this already. Maybe he doesn't. But either way, I believe that the brothers are thinking David's coming after them, that there'll be some sort of reparations, some sort of payback, because David now is in a position of authority. They don't know what he's going to be in charge of, because that shows up probably in a couple weeks after all the camp is broke down and they end up back at the palace. But they know that if it was them, they would pursue them. They would have payback. They're think of every insult, every disgusting thing you made that servant do. Every time that he tried to even do what was within his right as a servant to do, but you saw it and you'd shut it down. Drink the water at a certain time, get a glass of wine, have leftover lamb or whatever goat from a banquet, and you would just say, no, you're not allowed to eat that. And you'd laugh and walk away. You as a brother would have thought, we're protected from any sort of repercussions because he's not our brother. He's not our brother. And we're going to show Dad that we honor him. We're going to show Dad that we believe him. We're going to show Dad that his version of the truth is the truth we're going to go with. And they pursued this David's whole life. So whatever number of years that was, the whole time they rejected him, made fun of him, mocked him, told stories about him so that the drunks in town would sing songs about him. They told stories and lies about him when they were sitting on the elder seats at the gate of the city along with their father, and they would laugh. At the family banquets, they would tell stories about all kinds of stuff, but somebody always had something to say about something, quote, stupid that David would do. His stupid songs, his terrible musical abilities, the time that he let a lion steal a lamb. They would skip the part that he ran after the lion and ripped his head off and tore the lamb from the jaws of the lion. They'd skip that part. They would just say, he's such an idiot, he let a lion take a lamb. Like, you can't hear a lion sneaking up on you. I mean, any idiot can hear a lion. Or a bear, right? Remember that time you let the bear in? A stupid idiot. He's such a stupid. Dad, why do we still have that stupid slave around David? Why don't we get rid of him? And I'm sure Jesse's thinking, because your mother won't let me. I think that probably was a bottom line. Like I think in her mind, fine, you want to raise him as a servant, fine, but he's not leaving this household. I kind of think that was a conversation that probably happened right after the birth, when Jesse had already made fun of the mother and accused her of sleeping with somebody else. And when that birth came and he came in, I think she probably said, you look at me. This is your child. And I don't care if you don't accept him. You do not let him leave this house. And that's what I think happened. In my own little way. That's the way I see it happening. If I was writing a movie script, that's the way it would go down. Not that you can prove it one way or the other, but that's the way I think it went down. And I think these brothers were nervous. I think, they lived in a culture of fear because of the way that Saul was leading to begin with. But now I think they really were afraid because their brother was now being recognized and placed in a position where his authority and his words could mean trouble for them. He could shut down trade deals. He could shut down real estate deals, right? In royalty, a king could request your land. You had to give it to him. or you had to work the land and give the resources back to the palace. Like they could totally see David wiping out their herds, wiping out their crops, turning them into, what would you call that? Oh, servants. Servants of the king. Oh, I'm telling you, they spiraled out of control, spiraled into such negative mindsets. It had to be a little bit comical by the end of it. And I'm sure the dad is just like he's just rocking back and forth sitting on the pillow. They're losing their appetite. They're drinking wine. I'm sure the mother is hearing what's happened at this point because the servants that are coming in and out of the eating tent are bringing words back to the kitchen and telling the matron, which was not unusual, right? They would report things. I'm guessing she might have even listened in a little bit. And part of her, I'm sure, is pretty happy to hear about how well David's doing and the fact that God had made a way, a prayer that she had prayed on the hilltops, listening to him sing and dance. Or just sing. Maybe, not all his songs were happy. There were times she just was like, God, make a way for this boy. There's no way he deserves this. And God made a way. He made a way. And she's probably thinking, this is awesome. And then she's also thinking, this could get bad, actually. No, they have a point. They do have a point. He could do something bad, or he could make it difficult. He could definitely impact the family's ability to make a living and to be wealthy. He could spread rumors now in positions that would actually, devastate Jesse and turn him into something that is a mockery in the village. Oh, this had to be crazy time in the tent back at Jesse's house. This had to be crazy time. And all of this is probably a week after David kills Goliath. Like that's when that conversation is happening. So there's in their minds, by the time they get home and they have these conversations and they meet again the next day and they talk a little bit more, like, do you really think he'd do that? By the next day, I think they're probably thinking, we weren't always mean to him. There were times that, weren't there times that we were nice to him? And they'd come up with a couple, and then because now they've brought in all the brothers, right? All the three that showed up brought the other three in, and all the wives are talking in another 10, and they're talking in their 10, and they're trying to come up with ways that they could kind of make things not so bad for David, maybe send him a message, maybe send him, a gift, let him congratulate him on his new position. It had to be a very complicated and interesting interactions amongst Jesse's family at that time. And then the third day, or second day back, and then the third day back, and then the fourth day back, and they keep waiting for a messenger from the king. They keep waiting for a royal decree. They keep waiting for maybe someone from the army to show up and recruit servants for the army, to take care of the army men, not give them positions in the army like you would if you liked your brothers and you got a position in the army. No, but to make them servants in the army, guys that were doing the cooking, the cleaning, the latrine digging, that sort of thing. They were waiting. I think they were waiting, for weeks. And then they were discussing, well, maybe David's setting us up. Maybe this is just his way of dragging this out to a time that we eventually, when it finally happens, like it's going to be really bad. Like he's putting together something really, really bad. We should have done something. We should have been nicer. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. This is terrible. Oh, Dad, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And they waited. What's awesome is they waited a long time because David never did it. David was so convinced of the pursuit of God, so convinced of the connection with heaven, he didn't need to pay anyone back. He appreciated the journey. David appreciated the journey. The passion for the journey is one of the ways that I think God speaks to so many people. When all you do is wait for the next bad thing to happen, you miss the beauty of the moment. And David's ability to live in the moment meant that David had he had beautiful memories from his childhood. And yeah, he could, if he wanted to, could focus on all the bad stuff. And we see that in a lot of the Psalms that he would write. He starts out with all the bad stuff, but he always ends with the good stuff because that's where he lands. That's where he spends his time. He doesn't deny that the bad stuff happens. He just denies it the power over him. He denies it a position where it's going to influence the way he looks at life. And that's a big deal. To deny negative circumstances and negative relationships a position of power in your life. And I believe David did that. I believe David had it right. That was probably one of those long pauses, right? I'm going to catch that when I listen to it. That was a dramatic pause. Why, thank you very much. It certainly was dramatic. Yeah, it'd be nice if we could see your face, though. Well, you keep telling friends about this podcast. We get this podcast big enough. Boom. Maybe I can afford to get a studio and we'll put up an iPhone to take my picture while I'm talking. But meanwhile, feel free to stop by my Bob Thoughts page if you want to see what I look like. There's lots of opportunities to see all kinds of views of me, at least of my face. Not all the views of me, but because I do those thoughts in all kinds of places, different times of days, different hairstyles. All right. I'm going to end there, actually. I think it's good. And we'll end there. We're going to pick it up. Oh, my gosh. Everything is so good right now. And then, baby, does it go bad. So till then, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Epic Narrative. If you have questions for Bob or would like to reach out for booking, please email us at thebobswitzer@gmail.com or visit thebobswitzer.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to The Epic Narrative podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. See you next week for another chapter in our story on The Epic Narrative.